This woman personifies performance character. She is an inspiration to young women everywhere. So, Amelia, on to you. Amelia Earhart.
I'm an only child. I like to say you can't have one kid named Amelia Earhart and one kid not. For 32 years, every single day I have been asked, is that your real name? My dad's last name is Earhart, spelled the same way. My father and my mother decided when they got married, my mom said, we've got a great opportunity here. What if we named her after one of the most influential and passionate women in all of history? Let's see if this little girl right here could possibly eventually turn into this little girl right here. It has been an obligation, it has at times been a burden, but most of the time it's been the greatest gift that they could have ever given me. Amelia Earhart obviously played a very big role in my life in terms of figuring out my identity. Who would I decide to be after being named Amelia Earhart? Through the years, the biggest passion started to develop, I would say, at about age 21. And that's when I started my very first flight training lessons. And when I got out to the airplane the very first time, there was absolutely nothing about that situation that should have led me to falling in love with flight. But I tell you what, the second that I got off the ground and I experienced flight for the very first time, I knew that that's what I was meant to do. So while my career led me into television and radio and eventually professional speaking, flying airplanes is when I feel the most natural. It's when I feel the most myself and when I'm definitely the most happy. You could see my heart was just poured into aviation in every single possible way that I could make it become, because of course, why would I not? Look how much fun I'm having. That's a really ugly picture. Girls don't show ugly pictures unless they're having a lot of fun. I started to question to myself, what if I could do the biggest trip of my life? What if I could go out there and fly all the way around the world? Amelia Earhart said, the most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity. The fears are paper tigers. You can do anything that you decide to do. You can act to change and control your life, and the procedure, the process, is its own reward. And for the first 30 years of my life, I believed that I was related to Amelia Earhart. Imagine going for 30 years, thinking one thing, and learning on national television, on the Today Show, that one thing was wrong. Talk about character building. We're sitting there on the couch on live television, and they said, so Amelia, how are you related to Amelia Earhart? And I said, well, we share a distant common ancestry traced back to the 1700s. Amelia, I am so sorry. You share absolutely no connection to the original Amelia Earhart. When you go 30 years of your life believing one thing that your parents have told you, basing your identity, basing flight lessons and training and a huge amount of research and funding to go into this thing that you have been so strongly tied to because you were named after someone, it's crushing. I had a very serious choice to make because I had raised close to $2 million to make a flight around the world happen. Oh, Amelia doesn't deserve to do this flight around the world because she's not related. I even had people write to me and tell me that they hoped that my airplane failed over the ocean and that I had the same fate as the original Amelia. I actually questioned for a very short period of time, should I make this flight around the world happen or should I just give up because I'm not related to Amelia? I asked for help. I said, what do I do? I feel like my identity has been taken away from me. And one of my best mentors, someone who I'm still in very close contact with today, said to me, when you were born, did the FAA walk into that delivery room and hand you your pilot's license just because your name is Amelia Earhart? And I chuckled a bit. I said, of course not. And he said, that's exactly right. You did the exact same amount of work that every other pilot out there at this level has done. So get your butt out there. You're going to fly around the world. I wanted to give you an idea of just some of the things that had to be accomplished before that trip took place. I had to talk Pilatus into letting me borrow a plane. So this is the aircraft. This is the Pilatus PC-12. I named it the Silver Lining because in all the midst of losing that identity of Amelia Earhart, figuring out what I wanted to do with this flight around the world and how would I make a bigger impact not only on myself but also on the future of women in aviation, this was the silver lining. So this is what it looked like inside the Pilatus the day before that we left. We had survival gear, survival raft, 2 flight cases right up front, and the big metal thing that you see in the middle of the aircraft, that's the fuel tank. So the views were just spectacular. We're talking The longest sunrises and sunsets that I could ever imagine seeing over the Indian Ocean, through the South Pacific. Colors like this, beginning and ending each and every day. I'm one of the very few people in the world that has now seen the sunrise and the sunset around the entire globe. Papua New Guinea was not always this friendly. When we first arrived, I was met at gunpoint because they had never, ever seen a woman like me arrive at their airport. They couldn't fathom the fact that my name was on that paperwork as the captain of this ship. In the end, what I learned in that situation in Papua New Guinea, and you can see it in this picture, is that really kindness is the universal language. This is Howland Island, and this is where Amelia intended to land after she departed Papua New Guinea. This is where Amelia was trying to get to before she disappeared. Now, flying over Howland Island, I had a very special surprise planned. I had started about 2.5 years ago a fund to see how many girls we could put through flight school. On average, only 15 women across the United States learn to fly every year. Right when I checked before the flight around the world, we had somehow accumulated $120,000 to give out to these young women. And I tweeted out the names of the scholarship recipients over Howland Island in honor of Amelia Mary Earhart, the girls who would then go on to learn how to fly. Tears were flowing. I'm wondering what my parents are thinking. The girls are responding. I'm giving out money. I'm flying over the South Pacific, so I've got to focus on that. And boy, it all came together when I returned back to Oakland safely after flying 28,000 miles. Mom got the very first hug, as she should, and I thanked her for this name. You know, people oftentimes ask me, did you have an obligation to complete a flight around the world? Well, you bet I did, because I owed it to one of the most incredible women in history, but also to Mom and Dad. And as soon as I got the Mom and Dad hugs done, the media just rushed in, and I said, hang on, there's one other person I've got to talk to. This gentleman here is Captain Tinarello. I was out at the Oakland airport when I departed on the flight. Well, 18 days goes by, 28,000 miles around the world, 108.6 flight hours, and Captain Tinarello is standing there next to my parents, and he leans in really closely and he says, Amelia, there's something I didn't tell you. That in 1937, I was 6 years old, and I stood right here in this exact spot, and I watched the first Amelia Earhart depart on her flight around the world. I have waited 77 years to find out what happened to her, and you just brought her back to me. That right there is why that second flight around the world had to happen. I said, you know what, I've always been some version of Amelia Earhart, and now I am my version of Amelia Rose Earhart, because I picked up where she left off and I brought her spirit home, but now it's time to carry it forward. Isn't it beautiful the way history repeats itself? You know, there may not be a bloodline connection between Amelia and I, and for a long time I thought that that was the most important part of who I am and who I would eventually become. But what I realize now, after flying around the globe and recreating her flight, is that I share something so much deeper than a bloodline connection with Amelia. After you fly around the world becomes a much, much, much smaller place. But it is so much bigger in terms of its beauty and in terms of its potential for all of us here in this room. Thank you.